There is a limestone slab sitting in the basement storage of the Cairo Museum that most curators no longer point visitors toward. It is cataloged under inventory number JDE 2091. It is roughly the size of a coffee table. It is covered in hieroglyphs, and it has been sitting in that building for over 160 years, mostly ignored, occasionally dismissed, quietly reshaping every assumption we have about the ancient world, for anyone willing to actually read it. Auguste Mariette found it in 1858. He was excavating the ruins of a small temple near the base of the Great Pyramid when his crew uncovered the slab, half buried in sand. It was not hidden deliberately, as far as anyone could tell. It had simply been forgotten there. Mariette photographed it, cataloged it, and published a translation. And then the academic world spent the next century and a half explaining why it probably didn't mean what it said. Because what it said was this: that when Pharaoh Khufu arrived at Giza to build his great monument, the Sphinx was already there, already buried to its neck in desert sand, already ancient, already waiting. Not a myth, not a metaphor. A pharaoh arriving at a construction site and finding the most iconic monument in human history already standing there, already old, before his dynasty had built a single stone. And if that is true, if the Sphinx existed before the men who supposedly created it, then everything buried beneath this plateau becomes a different kind of question, not an archaeological question, a forensic one. We are not looking for who built Giza. We are looking for what they left inside it. And we are looking for why. At some point before the pharaohs arrived, someone decided to bury it. If this is the kind of investigation you want to keep following, subscribe right now, because we are just getting started, and the layers go much deeper than you think. Here is where it gets strange. In 1990, a Boston University geologist named Robert Schoch traveled to Giza not to study history, but to study rock. His specialty was erosion patterns. What he found when he examined the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the trench carved around the Sphinx's body, was not what the mainstream timeline predicted. The erosion patterns on those limestone walls were not horizontal, not wind-driven. They were deep, vertical, undulating channels of the kind that form only under one condition: prolonged, heavy rainfall. Pounding, sustained precipitation over a period of many centuries. The last time North Africa experienced that kind of rainfall was between approximately 7,000 and 5,000 BCE. Some estimates push earlier. Either way, the geological verdict was the same. The Sphinx enclosure was carved during a wet period that ended thousands of years before the pharaohs existed. Schoch published his findings. The academic response was swift and almost uniformly dismissive. Egyptologists argued that he had misread the rock, that wind-blown sand could produce similar patterns, that the dates were impossible, because we have no other evidence of a civilization capable of carving the Sphinx that early. But that explanation has a problem. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and Robert Schoch was not looking for a civilization. He was looking at limestone. The limestone said what it said. And when you pair that geological verdict with the Inventory Stele, a document created in ancient Egypt, about ancient Egypt, that explicitly states the Sphinx predates Khufu, you are no longer dealing with one anomalous data point. You are dealing with two independent lines of evidence pointing in the same direction. Something was at Giza before the pharaohs. Something significant enough that the people who came later built their entire civilization on top of it, literally and possibly figuratively. Now here is what the ancient texts actually describe. For decades, scholars dismissed it as symbolic. The older Egyptian records, not the dynastic ones, but the pre-dynastic mythological texts, the pyramid texts, the portions of the Book of the Dead that refer to what lies beneath the sacred ground, speak repeatedly of a place called the Duat in the earth, not the celestial underworld, not the spiritual afterlife, the Duat in the earth. A physical location, described with specific directional language. Beneath the great threshold. Beneath the guardian. Beneath the place where the sun is balanced. Most scholars read this as poetic, religious imagery. The guardian is a metaphor for death. The great threshold is a metaphor for transformation. The place where the sun is balanced is an astrological concept tied to the equinox, but hidden inside these descriptions is something that shouldn't exist in a purely symbolic text. Clue 1. The ancient pyramid texts describe a location beneath the guardian where the waters of the deep are tamed and made to serve. The mainstream interpretation is straightforward. This is a description of the Nile flooding cycle, metaphorically controlled by the gods. It is a theological statement about divine power over nature. Then, modern geology found something that changed everything. Seismic surveys conducted at the Giza plateau in the early 1990s revealed a series of anomalous features beneath the Sphinx. Cavities, channels, and void spaces cut into the bedrock in patterns that do not match natural limestone formation. These are not random cavities. They are connected. They form what appears to be a network running beneath the monument. Additional ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted by a joint team in 1996, detected what researchers described as rectangular anomalies, man-made shapes, beneath the left paw of the Sphinx, at a depth of approximately 5 to 8 meters. Rectangular, beneath the paw, in limestone bedrock, not similar to natural formation, not inspired by natural cavities, geometrically inconsistent with any geological process. The water channels described in the ancient text, the tamed waters beneath the guardian. And if that's true, it means whoever carved the Sphinx enclosure also engineered something beneath it, something that directed water, something that required planning, construction, and an understanding of the plateau's hydrological behavior. They weren't guessing. They were recording. Clue 2. The ancient texts also refer to a location called the Chamber of the First Sound. The description is remarkable for how technical it is, once you strip away the religious language. It is described as a room where the breath of creation is captured within stone, and the resonance of the earth's own voice is made visible to those who enter. In religious context, this is clearly a description of a sacred space, a ceremonial hall, the voice of God made manifest. But here is what happened when sound engineers and acoustic researchers began studying the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid in the 1990s. The chamber, built from approximately 100 blocks of Aswan granite, each weighing between 25 and 70 tons, resonates. It resonates at a very specific frequency. Studies conducted by researchers, including acoustic archaeologist John Stuart Reid, found that the chamber produces a standing wave at approximately 1.5 hertz when struck at certain points. This frequency sits precisely in the range of the human theta brainwave state. It also aligns closely with the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of Earth's own atmosphere. Not similar, not approximately, precisely engineered. The coffer, the granite box the size of a bathtub, sitting in the corner, which Egyptologists have long described as a sarcophagus, despite the fact that no mummy was ever found inside it, despite the fact that its measurements make it impossible to have been introduced into the chamber after the pyramid was sealed, resonates independently. Strike its rim. The box rings like a bell. Its dimensions, when analyzed by Christopher Dunn, a precision machining engineer who spent 2 decades studying the internal measurements of the Great Pyramid, appear to correspond to a highly specific harmonic ratio. Not decorative, not ceremonial, functional. The Chamber of the First Sound, the place where the resonance of the Earth's own voice was made visible. They weren't writing theology. They were writing engineering notes. Clue 3. The most specific description in the pre-dynastic texts, the one that researchers cannot satisfactorily explain as pure metaphor, refers to 7 descents beneath the place of the guardian, each one sealed against the rising of the water, where the machine of the earth below was tended by those who did not speak of what they saw. 7. Descents. Sealed chambers. A machine of the earth below. In 1990, archaeologist Zahi Hawass completed the first full excavation of a shaft that had been known to locals for generations, located beneath the causeway of Khafre, roughly halfway between the Sphinx and Khafre's funerary temple. The shaft descends in multiple stages, nearly 30 meters beneath the surface of the plateau. It opens into a series of interconnected chambers. Inside those chambers, Hawass's team found basalt sarcophagi. They found human remains. They found the remains of what may be deliberate flood management. Constant pumping was required during the excavation because groundwater continued to rise inside the lower chamber, even today. The shaft has 3 levels, not 7, unless the additional levels remain sealed. Because here is what Hawass's team also found. On the west wall of the lowest accessible chamber, the ancient Egyptians had cut a tunnel approximately 6 meters long. It was sealed from the inside. The investigation ended at that wall. It was sealed, it was mapped, and then it disappeared from the active excavation record. The Shore Foundation, a research group backed by Florida State University, conducted an expedition in the late 1990s with Egyptian government approval to survey the tunnels beneath the Giza Plateau using ground-penetrating radar and fiber optic cameras. Footage was reportedly obtained from at least one subsurface passage. Then, in 1998, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities suspended all private excavation permits on the plateau. The Shore expedition ceased operations. The survey footage was never publicly released. The official explanation was administrative, paperwork, jurisdictional disagreement over who controlled access to the site. The researcher went silent. The equipment came home. The shaft is still there. Now, does this prove the most extreme version of the story? Probably not. The skeptical explanation for the Inventory Stele is reasonable. It may have been written or modified centuries after Khufu's reign by priests attempting to give their local temple a grander history. That is a credible argument. Robert Skoke's erosion interpretation is debated by serious geologists who argue that wind-driven particulate matter can produce vertical weathering under specific conditions. That debate is not resolved. The acoustic properties of the King's Chamber are real and documented, but whether they represent intentional engineering or the coincidental result of working with massive granite blocks in an enclosed space is a question that no one has definitively answered. But that doesn't make the discovery ordinary. What it means is this: every anomaly at Giza, the erosion, the stele, the underground cavities, the acoustic resonance, the sealed shaft, the suspended expeditions, every single one of them can be explained individually as a coincidence, a misreading, or an administrative accident. But they cannot all be coincidences simultaneously. At some point, the accumulation of anomalies becomes a signal, and the signal at Giza has been growing louder for 30 years. Then, in November 2017, a team of physicists from Nagoya University and the French HIP Institute published the results of a 2-year scanning project in the journal Nature. Using an imaging technique called muon tomography, which uses cosmic ray particles to penetrate solid stone the way X-rays penetrate flesh. The Scan Pyramids team had produced the most detailed internal image of the Great Pyramid ever created. And inside that image, above the Grand Gallery, at a height of roughly 40 meters, they found something that no one expected: a void. A cavity approximately 30 meters long, with a cross-section comparable to the Grand Gallery itself, previously completely unknown, not in any historical record, not in any ancient blueprint, not mapped by any expedition in the 4,500 years since the pyramid was ostensibly completed. 30 meters of empty space inside one of the most studied structures in human history. There is no consensus on what it is. There is no consensus on what it was for. It is still there. And if the Great Pyramid contains a 30-meter void that we did not know about until 2017, then everything we thought we knew about what the pyramid contains, about what the entire plateau contains, needs to be held much more loosely than we have been holding it. What would it mean if these elements were connected? If the water channels beneath the Sphinx, the acoustic properties of the King's Chamber, the sealed tunnel at the base of the Osiris shaft, and the unknown void above the Grand Gallery were all part of the same structure? Not a tomb, not a monument to a pharaoh's ego. Something built with a different purpose. Something built when the Sahara was wet, when North Africa looked nothing like it does today. When whatever civilization existed here understood resonance and hydrology and the behavior of stone at a level that we are only now beginning to reverse engineer with particle physics. If that structure was operational once, if it was a machine in any meaningful sense of that word, then the question is not who built it. The question is what happened to them. Why did they seal it? Why did the civilization that came after, the civilization we call ancient Egypt, find it already buried and make it the center of their entire cosmology? Why did they point every ritual, every myth, every map of the afterlife back toward a spot beneath the ground at Giza, describing it with language just technical enough to mean something and just symbolic enough to be safely ignored? The pyramid texts say that the duat in the earth was sealed so that its power could not be disturbed. The priests who guarded it were described as those who remembered what the others had forgotten, and eventually even they forgot. Or they were made to forget, or the memory was deliberately buried along with everything else. The Inventory Stele is still in the basement of the Cairo Museum. The shaft beneath Khafre's causeway is still accessible to those with permission. The sealed tunnel on the west wall of the lowest chamber is still there, closed exactly as it was when the ancient Egyptians sealed it from the inside, 1,000 years after the Old Kingdom ended. The 30-meter void above the Grand Gallery has not been opened, has not been excavated, and as of today has not been publicly explained. The plateau is still there. Every morning, the sun rises over it. Every morning, tourists walk across the desert above the sealed tunnels 30 meters overhead, taking photographs and buying postcards. Most people walk right past it, and beneath their feet, in the dark and the silence and the rock, something is still waiting. If this investigation stays with you, and I think it will, make sure to watch the next video in this series, where we go inside the Osiris shaft measurements and what the sealed west wall tunnel may actually contain. Like this video if any part of what you just heard deserves a harder look. Subscribe so you're here when the next layer gets pulled back. Because we are nowhere near the bottom of this.